Chapter 568, Night 8. Noir's eyes never opened again. Eugene quietly gazed at her face, which looked as peaceful as if she were merely sleeping. There was no sign of pain, no hint of lingering regret, just a serene, self-satisfied expression. Morgiabella had died. He turned his head to look at the distant sunrise, which was already hanging in the sky above. The night had passed and morning had arrived. The light descending from the twilight sky illuminated the city. A once vibrant place was now reduced nearly to rubble, with most buildings collapsed. Eugene paused to look at the frozen Ferris wheel, then let out a short laugh. "It's over," he said. Morgiabella was dead. He felt it deeply once again. A sudden pain surged from his severed arm, and his chest felt as if it might burst or tear open. His whole body trembled with a chill, and his head spun as his vision began to blur. "I'm going to faint," Eugene stated. He chuckled bitterly. Disregarding everything else that had taken place, he had used ignition twice in a row. Even discounting the successive use of ignition, he could not have been fine. He had endured mental attacks and nightmares and had fought fiercely on the line of death in reality. His injuries were not limited to his left arm. Even his insides felt shredded. It was a miracle he was even alive, and the backlash from pushing himself so hard was more than mere discomfort. "Sienna," he called out. Eugene unclenched his hand, which was still covered in blood. It revealed a necklace. He looked at Noir's left hand, at the ring on her ring finger, and sighed deeply. "Are you okay?" he asked. Sienna, who had been sitting slumped, flinched at his question. She replied with a pout, "What do you mean, okay?" "Just everything. Your body, or..." Eugene trailed off. "The conversation you just had, the emotions you're feeling. Honestly, I'm not okay with them," replied Sienna. She staggered to her feet. She saw the shadows of Eugene and Noir, created by the dawn light, in the midst of the ruined city. Their shapes were overlapping closely. "Still, I'll say I'm okay," she corrected. "But you just said you're not okay," Eugene questioned. "I mean, I'm not really okay, but I'll say I am. It's not like I can't understand you." And then that whore, she stopped herself mid-sentence. It wasn't that she thought Eugene would react to the word. She didn't even consider that he would. But Noir's last smirk in her will had prevented Sienna from uttering the derogatory term. "Morgiabella did try to kill you. But still, in her dying moment, she did think well for your sake and intended for you to live," Sienna said. "You call that for my sake?" Eugene snorted softly and reached out to Noir. Her body was slowly turning to ash. It wasn't immediate, perhaps because he hadn't used the divine sword to finish her off. Still, it was only a matter of time. Before the morning passed, she would be completely gone. And Eugene likely wouldn't witness that scene. "Noir didn't want me to live for my sake, but rather, she left a curse. She wanted me to remember this day forever and suffer," Eugene explained. Carefully, Eugene lifted Noir's left hand and slowly removed the ring from her ring finger. Sienna watched silently. Swayed by his emotions, if Eugene were to put the ring on his finger, she thought it wouldn't really matter as long as it lightened the burden on his heart. "So you mean you'll be tormented by today?" Sienna asked probingly. "It seems likely," Eugene answered. "Do you regret killing Morgiabella?" Sienna asked. "I don't regret it. She needed to be killed and she herself desired death. That's why I killed her. If I hadn't, she would have killed me," Eugene replied simply. Sienna still couldn't fully grasp their relationship. Could she forgive Morgiabella? Honestly, it was difficult. But she could accept it as inevitable. Eugene probably felt the same. But in the end it had come to this. "It can't be helped," Eugene said, his voice trailing off into a faint smile. "Things turned out as we both wished. I would raise a toast if I could, but that's not possible." "Yeah," said Sienna. "I'm about to faint," Eugene repeated. "Yeah. Wait, what?" Startled, Sienna looked up to see Eugene casually wiping the bloodied ring and examining the engraving inside. Each of the rings was engraved with the names Hamildina's and Morgiabella. Eugene quietly threaded the two rings onto a chain and hung it around his neck. "Aren't you going to wear it on your finger?" Sienna inquired. "No," answered Eugene. "Why?" Sienna asked curiously. "What would you have me say if you ask why?" "There's no profound reason. I just don't want to play into Noir's wishes," he grumbled as he flicked the pair of rings on the necklace. It felt awkward suddenly wearing two necklaces. "Hey, right. My left arm. Where's my left arm? Eugene asked, looking around. Don't worry, I've kept it safe. But are you sure this will really reattach? Sienna asked skeptically. She flicked her finger and a large orb appeared in the sky. Eugene's left arm was floating inside. The original mud and blood-caked arm was now cleanly washed, even at the severed end. I've disinfected it, but what if it doesn't reattach? Sienna asked, worried. Mullen reattached his legs backward once and had to cut them off again to fix them, so why wouldn't an arm reattach? And it's not the first time I've lost an arm, Eugene explained patiently. That's true, but, the circumstances are different from when you lost it 300 years ago. You still haven't healed the scar on your cheek. It would be problematic if you became one-armed. I don't think you can beat the Demon King of Incarceration with just one arm, Sienna said seriously. This is a scar from a curse, so that's different. My left arm will be fine. It wasn't severed by a curse, answered Eugene. During the battle with Noir, her attacks until the very end were murderous but not cursed. The only curse she left was her last will. What about you? Are you going to take the Demon Eye of Fantasy? Eugene asked. She told me to use it, so why wouldn't I accept it? I'm going to take it, Sienna responded, her voice tense as she gripped the edge of her robe. I need it to kill the Demon King of Incarceration. Aren't you worried it's a trap set by Noir Giabella? Eugene asked. You aren't either, retorted Sienna. True enough. Eugene chuckled weakly and then lay sprawled on the ground. Only then did Sienna realize what he had said earlier and hurried to his side. You said you were about to faint? Where does it hurt? Sienna asked. Can't you see? Eugene responded mockingly. Can't I see? I mean, is it bad enough to faint? She asked. Yes. I'm forcing my eyes open right now. It's getting hard even to keep them open. I'm sleepy, he answered. Sleepy? Are you sure? That's okay? What if you never wake up? Sienna asked anxiously. Don't say something so ominous. Just do me a favor, asked Eugene. A favor? A favor? How can I not speak ominously when you talk like that? You're not making a will, are you? Asked Sienna. It's not a will, so don't worry. I'm just fainting. I might be out for a few days. Maybe even a week. Take Christina and Anise and go back to the Lionheart estate. You explain the situation, asked Eugene. Hey. Don't try to wake me if I sleep for too long. If you're really worried, tell my holy knights and Christina and Anise to pray. That should do it. And, he paused. With a feeble hand that barely moved, he gestured towards the ruins. Erase this city, he asked. I'd do it myself if I had the strength. Please, he requested. Well, that's not a difficult request, responded Sienna. He was asking her to erase the remnants of the city. Was it his desire not to remember this place as it had been, even though no trace of the old city remained in these ruins? Sienna sighed briefly and nodded. What about the body? She questioned. It'll disappear on its own. You need to take the Demon Eye of Fantasy before it does, he answered. What about a grave? Or a tombstone? She questioned. Are you crazy? No need, he said. Eugene looked at Sienna with disgust. His golden eyes were unfocused and dull. Sienna chuckled softly as his eyes began to close. Hey, get some rest. Sleep well, she said. It feels strange if you word it like that, Eugene murmured a complaint. He wondered if he might dream as his heavy eyelids closed. He didn't want to dream. So it is, murmured the Demon King of Incarceration. He was seated on a throne of dark chains in Babel Pandemonium. He opened his eyes as he spoke. Has she gone then? More Giabella had died. What had transpired in her domain, Giabella City, or what battles had been fought there, he could not see. There had been no place in Helmuth, or rather the entire continent, that was beyond the Demon King of Incarceration's observation. Or rather, that had been the case before. For the past year, the Demon King of Incarceration had been unable to observe Giabella City. The dream Noir Giabella had crafted and maintained was so insular that even he could not easily peer into it. Even though the Demon Eye of Divine Glory had been used to construct the dream, ironically, the bestower of the Demon Eye had been unable to interfere. Noir Giabella had thoroughly controlled both the Demon Eye of Divine Glory and the Demon King of Incarceration, using the power of the Demon Eye while stubbornly refusing to accept any of the Demon King of Incarceration's dark power. It had been quite difficult for me to imagine your death, the Demon King of Incarceration chuckled, resting his chin on his hand. Of course had he refused, nor could not have used the demon eye of divine glory. But he had not refused. He had let Noor Giabella have her way, recklessly using the powers of an emperor, a demon king, without even being asked. Was it because she was Helmuth's highest taxpayer? Was it because she was a duke? Because of her distinguished services 300 years ago? Any of these could be a reason. But more than anything, the Demon King of Incarceration had not refused because Noor Giabella had been so fervent. She had doggedly pursued a lifelong ambition and likely reached a satisfying conclusion. The Demon King of Incarceration felt slight envy. Was it for Hamel that you covered the night? He muttered. He had been unable to observe the dream. Even as it ultimately collapsed, the city's dark power continued to defy the Demon King of Incarceration's observation until the end. Therefore, the Demon King of Incarceration could not know how Noor Giabella's dream had evolved and reached its conclusion, how an entity of her stature could die, and how Hamel had managed to deal her a death blow. Or was it for a deep dream of your own? He questioned. He could not know the answer. Noor Giabella was dead. She had not made a pact with the Demon King of Incarceration, so her soul was not bound to flow to him. Perhaps her very soul had been extinguished. Eugene's divine sword, Levantian, could have incinerated even her soul. You had quite a relationship with Noor Giabella, the Demon King of Incarceration said. He looked down. From the dark palace, a blurry figure surged up. Duke Giabella was one of my few patrons, replied Balzac Ludbeth. He was the only surviving one of the 3 mages of incarceration. When I was the master of the Black Tower, she donated substantial sums annually, and during my studies in Helmuth she supported me in many ways, Balzac continued. I remember. Duke Giabella enjoyed your ideals, the Demon King commented. She did not mock me. She might have laughed, but there was no scorn. You were the same, Your Majesty, Balzac responded. Did you say you wanted to become a legendary wizard? Someone who would be remembered in history. The Demon King of Incarceration gave a thin smile. Naturally, the Demon King of Incarceration knew of Balzac's ideals. Balzac Ludbeth. The Demon King of Incarceration still remembered their first meeting, which had been facilitated by none other than Noor Giabella. He had been a young candidate for the position of the Blue Tower Master, yet for some unknown reason he left to pursue black magic in Helmuth instead. His unique background caught the attention of several high-ranking demons of Helmuth. Although many demons offered him pacts, Balzac formed no such alliances with any demon despite his intentions of becoming a black wizard. Indeed, it was nearly impossible for a human to wield dark power without making a pact with a demon. Balzac was no exception. While he rejected contracts with the demons, he wholeheartedly pursued black magic. He frequented the Black Wizard Academy, facing disdain yet devouring every scroll and tome on the dark arts. This eccentricity caught the eye of Noor Giabella. A groundbreaking agreement was made. Noor supported Balzac with dark power alone without binding his soul in return. Years later, having become a black wizard, Noor introduced Balzac to the Demon King of Incarceration. Do you mourn the death of Duke Giabella? Asked the Demon King of Incarceration. No, Balzac said as he shook his head. The Duke often spoke to me about what death meant. Though our relationship cooled after I stepped down as the master of the Black Tower, I knew how much she yearned for death and her obsession with Hamel. Eugene Lionheart. Balzac paused and gave a bitter smile. If she has reached the death she longed for and it was Eugene Lionheart who delivered it, then surely the Duke must have died content. Such a death is more suited to blessings than mourning, he said. That's a very you answer, the Demon King of Incarceration said with a slight smile and a nod. Achieving one's ideals, lifelong desires, or deepest wishes is no easy task, especially if they are almost unimaginable. How about you? My own deepest wish is very similar. It is difficult to imagine it achieved, responded Balzac. Do you consider it impossible? Asked the Demon King of Incarceration. I am doing my best, desperately. But it seems impossible, answered Balzac. If you wish, I could dissolve the contract, said the Demon King. Balzac flinched at the suggestion. That might bring you closer to your deepest wish. If you could overthrow those who will rise to this place soon. Hey, it would be nothing short of legendary, but that's impossible, said the Demon King. You jest cruelly, your majesty, Balzac said with a wry smile, shaking his head. I will gratefully accept just your words. As you have said, your majesty, it is impossible for me to defeat Eugene Lionheart, Sienna Meridian, and Christina Rogerus. However, I believe the opposite is also true, said Balzac. The opposite, mused the demon king of incarceration. If I were to dissolve our contract, I would become just an ordinary wizard. What could I accomplish then? Questioned Balzac.freewebnovel.com. You might join forces with Sienna Meridian, whom you admire, to strike at me, the demon king of incarceration suggested. Ha! Your majesty. If that were to happen, my ideal would turn into your defeat. That truly is unimaginable. It is impossible. I cannot envisage your defeat, Balzac said. A black wizard who betrays the demon king. Wouldn't that make for quite a legendary tale? The demon king questioned. If betrayal leads to failure and defeat, then it will only bring ridicule and mockery. In that case, I would rather stake my ideal on your majesty, Balzac said staunchly. He bowed deeply as he spoke. Any enemy that invades here will have to step over my corpse to reach the throne. You are free to flee, said the demon king. How could I run away and abandon the lord I serve? Balzac asked. You are not so loyal to me, the demon king retorted. There is a desire that compels my loyalty, Balzac answered. A desire, the demon king of incarceration mused, looking down at Balzac and letting out a small chuckle. What do you wish for? If I die, please take my soul. Allow me to see the end with you, Balzac requested. You do not wish for annihilation? The demon king asked. Which being would wish for annihilation? Said Balzac. It is not a difficult wish, the demon king responded. A soul pact had already been made. Even if Balzac were to die, his soul would return to the demon king of incarceration. The only exception was if he met his end with the divine sword that could incinerate even souls. But here in Babel, any soul that entered was claimed by the demon king of incarceration. Even if the divine sword turned Balzac's body and soul to ash, Babel would gather even the ashes. Granted, the demon king of incarceration said, closing his eyes in response. Balzac Ludbeth, you may die here in Babel. Yes. Pleased with the response, Balzac smiled contentedly and bowed even deeper. I shall indeed die here. Chapter 569, The Holy See 1. A dining table was surrounded by a cozy warmth. The dishes being served were an ordinary loaf of bread, some homemade soup, thick strips of bacon, and fried eggs. Steamed or baked potatoes were piled up in a separate basket. Ah, Eugene let out a sigh. As he was putting some bacon and a fried egg onto a slice of bread, he suddenly realized something. So this is just a dream, he muttered to himself. He turned to look in the direction that a rattling sound was coming from. A woman wearing loose house clothes with an apron pulled on top was standing in the kitchen. He knew what she was doing. She was grinding her coffee beans to make herself some coffee. Eugene didn't enjoy drinking coffee enough to have the patience for such an onerous task. He knew that she should also feel the same way. However, as part of a quiet and leisurely daily life, even cumbersome tasks like those could become a pleasure. Eugene silently laid down the fork he was holding. Then he tilted his chair backward and was lost in thought for a few moments. How long had this dream been going on for? It seemed to have lasted quite a long time. He wondered just what he had been doing before finally realizing that this was all a dream. Just what kind of life had he been living out in this dream? He was able to recall the answers to these questions very quickly. It seemed that he had just lived a normal and peaceful life. And for quite some time at that. With a wry grin, Eugene got to his feet. But the chair fell backward. You're not the one showing me this dream, right? Eugene asked, even though he already knew the answer to that. He didn't receive any response. The rattling sound had also stopped at some point. Like I thought, Eugene shook his head as he walked to the kitchen. The figure of the woman with her back turned towards him grew blurry. Without any hesitation, Eugene stretched out his hand. As with all lucid dreams that aren't controlled by someone else, Eugene's dream followed his wishes. The woman turned and looked at Eugene. I have to say, I really didn't want to dream about this, Eugene muttered to himself while staring at Noir's face, which had a faint smile on it. This wasn't a dream that Noir had created for him. The remaining fragments of emotions that he felt towards her had shaped this dream all on their own. Just like the dream Noir, Eugene smiled faintly as he stretched out his other hand as well. He could see a ring on his ring finger. Noir, who was just standing there blankly with a smile, was also wearing an identical ring on her ring finger. This was just that sort of dream. Without a pause, Eugene clenched his outstretched hand. The scene laid out in front of him crumpled up around his grip like a piece of paper. It kept shrinking smaller and smaller until it completely disappeared. In the blackness left by the dream's departure, Eugene closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, the dream space was no longer in complete darkness. Countless small lights were illuminating his dream. Eugene could hear voices coming from each of these small lights. They were calling out his name. While sensing all of these voices and the different sources of faith that were connected to him, Eugene let out a wry smile. Was I really still dreaming even though they were being this noisy and distracting? Eugene muttered to himself as he walked towards the light. It seems that her curse worked all too well. A bright light engulfed Eugene. Kaya. Until just now, all that Eugene could see was a dazzling white light, but when he actually opened his eyes, the light he saw was very dim, washed out, and gentle. A pale, orange-colored light that wasn't all that bright. It was the light that could only come from a night lamp placed next to a bed. Kaya awaya. Another thing that Eugene noticed was that it was extremely noisy. This sound wasn't coming from just one person. This was the sound of two people screaming at the tops of their lungs. It was so loud that, for a moment, Eugene missed the quiet and peaceful dream he had just been having, and he felt like he wanted to go back there. It felt as if he had suddenly woken up in the middle of a battlefield, and all of the noise was so loud that it was making his eardrums numb. Soon Eugene came to his full senses. Even though the light was already so faint, it was still causing his eyes to hurt. They felt sore and hot as if a beam of light was being shone directly onto his corneas. He reflexively tried to close his eyes once more, but even doing that was so uncomfortable that his body wasn't able to obey his thoughts. He had only opened his eyes for a few moments, but his eyeballs seemed to have instantly dried up and his eyelids felt stiff. Ah, Eugene groaned. His lips and the inside of his mouth didn't feel too dry to speak, but the voice that emerged sounded cracked and stuffy. His body's responsiveness was also very slow. As Eugene tried speaking a few more times, turning his body and rolling his dry eyes, the loud screaming coming from next to him continued with intermittent pauses. Hey, Eugene let out a deep groan as he turned his head toward the source of the two different screams. The lighting might be dim, but it was still enough to make out their faces. Right next to his bed, Eugene saw Mare and Rhaimira screaming while hugging each other. And they weren't just screaming. He didn't know the reason for it, but both of them were shedding thick streams of tears. Sir Eugene has opened his eyes. B. Benefactor is alive. It seemed that they weren't crying out of sorrow or grief but because they were feeling so joyful. For now, Eugene felt that he needed to calm them down, but the moment he opened his lips to say those words, the two kids leaped onto Eugene's bed at the same time. Sir Eugene. Benefactor. Cough. Right at the moment when he was about to speak, Mare's head slammed into his solar plexus. It was such an effective and damaging blow that it was difficult to determine whether it was truly an act done out of concern and affection, or whether it was actually an attack aimed with clear hostile intent. The timing was certainly accurate, but it had been able to strike so painfully and heavily because most of Eugene's senses felt strangely awkward and dull. His arm was also hurting him. Rhaimira, who had horns on her head, thankfully hadn't slammed headfirst into him as Mare had, but she was instead holding onto Eugene's arm and eagerly rubbing her forehead against him. Eugene felt like he knew why his body felt so heavy and sore. Barely managing to catch his faltering breath, Eugene slowly squeezed out a question. How many days has it been since I fell asleep? Mare, who had driven her head into his solar plexus and was now violently drilling her head into him, finally raised her head. How many days? Mare slowly repeated herself. Just now, did you really ask how many days it's been? Eugene took a deep breath before continuing. Well, it seems like it hasn't just been a few days. It looks like I might have been asleep for quite some time. It's been 3 months. Mare let out a shout. 3 months. 3 whole months. If we just count it by the days, you've been lying there asleep for almost 100 days now. Mare, to be more precise, Benefactor has finally opened his eyes after only 93 days, Rhaimira gently corrected her. What's the difference between 93 and 100? Mare angrily roared back. It's a difference of a week, Rhaenyra pointed out. Also, I don't think that it's a good idea to shout so loudly at Benefactor, who has miraculously woken up after being asleep for 93 days. Mare hissed back at her. You vile thing. I've told you before, don't take advantage of moments like these to win over Sir Eugene. Right now Sir Eugene needs to be scolded. Then just like they usually did, Mare and Rhaenyra both grabbed onto each other's hair and started squabbling. But Eugene couldn't spare even a single thought towards mediating their argument. His lips half parted as he blinked his eyes in shock. 3 months? I was actually asleep for 93 days. Eugene mumbled in disbelief. He had gotten the feeling that he had been in the dream for quite a long time. However, the passage of time in a dream flowed differently from the way time did in reality. Eugene could never have even imagined that he would be asleep for so long. I'm just fainting. I might be out for a few days. Maybe even a week. Don't try to wake me if I sleep for too long. If you're really worried, tell my holy knights and Christina and Anise to pray. That should do it. Why didn't you wake me up? Eugene shouted in his hoarse voice. He definitely remembered what he had said to Sienna before passing out in Giabella City, but there was no way she would pay attention to something like that. And there were degrees to everything. If someone had been unconscious for 3 months, wasn't it necessary to do whatever it took to wake him up? Regardless of whether he had said not to wake him, if he had been unconscious for that long, shouldn't they have resorted to other measures by now? We did try to wake you up. A dull, subdued voice was heard from the other side of his bed. Eugene found this gloomy voice so frightening even for him, that his shoulders couldn't help but shudder in shock. We tried to wake you up over and over again, the voice explained. Every day we spoke into your ear, Sir Eugene. We've also tried several times to shake you as hard as we could without doing any damage to your body. Eugene held his tongue. The voice continued. Naturally, we also prayed to you every day. It wasn't just us either. All of the holy knights ordained by you, Sir Eugene, joined in our prayers. Since even that didn't seem to be enough, we even requested all of the people of the continent who believed in you to pray for you despite not having been baptized by you. Oh, ahem, Eugene awkwardly cleared his throat. We even tried using several more proactive measures. Lady Sienna created several new magic spells in order to wake you up, and we also attempted to delve into your mind, Sir Eugene. Perhaps in an attempt to recreate what happened in the South Seas, Seal would hold on tightly to your hand while repeatedly groaning in effort. And apart from her, all the other Lionhearts have also spent time lingering by your side, the voice sighed. Eugene coughed as he tried to defend himself. Well, in any case, I didn't wake up isn't because I didn't want to. Before he could even finish his fumbling excuse, Christina shook her head and cut Eugene short, saying, I know that. In an unsteady gait, Christina slowly approached Eugene. He could see that her shoulders, cheeks, and eyes were shaking with unshed tears. Christina admitted in a tearful voice, Lady Anise and I were the most— No, we can't say that we were the most concerned about you. Everyone was worried about you, Sir Eugene. Everyone sincerely wished for you to wake up in good health. Eugene wasn't sure what to say. And thankfully you have woken up, Christina sniffed as she slowly drew closer and closer. He didn't know if it was because she had shot them a subtle gaze or if they had chosen to show some tact all by themselves. But Mare and Rhaenyra, who had been clinging to Eugene, quickly got off the bed. Once she reached the side of his bed, Christina practically threw herself into Eugene's arms. We're so very thankful that you woke up safely, Christina murmured into Eugene's chest. Eugene had been unconscious for 3 whole months. Although he hadn't died, he was just lying there in a state no different from death. Moreover, as the saints had also lost consciousness before Eugene had fainted, they must have been even more worried about Eugene when he continued to stay unconscious after they had already woken up. I'm sorry, Eugene said as he raised one hand to stroke Christina on the head. Then he grunted as he belatedly realized something. His left arm, which had been severed during his battle with Noir, was perfectly reattached. Even though it had been reattached after being severed in battle, the nerve seemed to have been connected seamlessly, as his arm felt as if it had never even been cut off. Eugene didn't feel any discomfort even as he tried to move his fingers. So you've finally noticed it, Hamel, the saint murmured in response to his gasp. The way she called him had changed. Her head, which was buried into his chest, lifted as Anise looked up at him with narrowed eyes. Anise ran her fingers down both sides of Eugene's chest as she whispered, although reattaching a severed arm had become a common and familiar practice for me 300 years ago, this was my first time doing it in this era. Perhaps due to that, I can't help but feel a slight concern. Do you feel any discomfort when moving it? My arm seems fine, but my body doesn't feel all that well, Eugene honestly reported. My eyes are also sore and it's hard for me to speak. And I've developed such a clear sensitivity to the movements of my internal organs that it's giving me the creeps. Anise shrugged. We did our best to care for you, but since you're waking up after 3 months of constant sleep, that can't be helped. Don't you feel hungry? Eugene answered vaguely. I do feel kind of hungry, but at the same time not really. My sense of hunger seems muted. You were in no condition to eat. After all, it was impossible for you to swallow your food, let alone chew it. I even considered chewing your food myself, passing it into your mouth and helping you swallow it, Anise said thoughtfully as the fingers tracing Eugene's ribs started tapping on his skin like she was playing the piano. As she did this, her fingers slowly began to move upwards. Her hand movements were so subtle that Eugene didn't even feel ticklish due to them. Eugene swallowed a gulp as he stared at Anise with a look of fear in his eyes. Don't look at me like that, Anise huffed. I did consider that method, but we never actually ended up using it. While you were unconscious, the nutrients that you needed were delivered directly into your body using magic, along with all your medications. And as for your excretions, Eugene paled. No way you didn't. Anise rolled her eyes. Don't let your imagination get out of control. No one even had to take your pants off. All of that was also quite conveniently handled by magic. When she said the word conveniently, Anise's brow seemed to furrow slightly. Why did it seem like she couldn't help but feel some kind of regret? Eugene was reminded of that time in the past when he was left unable to move his body after using ignition. He didn't know if it was just her mood, but Christina had seemed to secretly enjoy the situation of caring for Eugene while he was in pain. However, no matter how convenient and amazing that spell might be, it seems that it still has its limits. It might be because you haven't been able to eat properly for the past 3 months, Hamel, but I can see that you've gotten a little thinner, Anise observed. I do feel like my arms have gotten a little less thick, Eugene muttered in agreement. It's not just your arms, your whole body has been reduced in size. Well, since you are in good health, all of that should return soon. Your muscles, I mean. However, what about your mind? Anise asked in concern. Her fingers, which were tracing the sharp lines of his ribs and his slightly thin chest muscles, suddenly came to a halt. Like, Anise's fingers had rubbed against the pair of rings that were hanging on his necklace. Are you truly sure that your mind is in good health? Anise asked in concern. My mind? Eugene repeated quizzically. Anise reminded him, Christina should have already told you, Hamel. While you were asleep, Sienna tried to enter your mind several times. Of course, we also attempted to do the same thing. After all, awakening and healing wounded or broken minds is also within the realm of holy magic. Eugene listened silently. However, neither I, Christina, nor Sienna could dive into your mind, Anise revealed. Your unconscious mind was able to strongly reject any such intrusion. Anise's expression changed. She shifted between looking at Eugene and his necklace with a sorrowful look in her eyes. Were you in a dream? Anise asked. Eugene grunted in confirmation. Anise nodded. And were you so immersed in your dream that you didn't want to wake up? That might have been the reason for it, Eugene said with a shrug. Anise raised an eyebrow. What's with that vague response? It's only recently that I realized it was a dream, Eugene explained with a faint smile as he placed his hand over Anise's. I'm sure you've also had that kind of a dream at some point in your life. Sometimes we dream about things that we desire, but at other times, we are forced to dream about things that we don't want, things that we hate, and things that we don't actually want to dream about. It was Anise's turn to listen silently. Eugene shook his head as he said, It's not that I didn't want to wake up. It's just that it took me a while to come to my senses, and there were various factors that had left my body in a not-so-great condition. After some thought, Anise cleared her throat. Ahem. Allow me to be clear, Hamel. Your physical condition wasn't just bad, it was extremely dire. One arm was severed, you had barely any bones that weren't broken, and the same was true of your internal organs. And then there were the problems with your mind. But I'm perfectly healthy now, aren't I? Eugene confirmed. Yes, Christina and I both worked very hard to restore your body. If you had had any divine power left within you, you would have been able to recover on your own, but 3 months ago your divine power was in a sealed state. If saints like us weren't around, you would have missed the best chance to reattach your arm, so you would have had to go without your left arm for the rest of your life. If that had happened, it would have been quite the challenge, Eugene mused. Could I have at least gotten a prosthetic arm? Or perhaps I could have strapped Levantine onto the stump to serve as an arm. Looking at the quality of Nerissa's one prosthetic leg, such a prosthetic would be somewhat serviceable for daily life, but it would be impossible for you to have fought with it, Anise commented. That's true, Eugene agreed. Krisitna, Anise, thanks to you too, my arm was reattached in perfect condition. Anise couldn't help but smile at the way he immediately began to flatter her without any sense of shame. She gently shook off Eugene's hand, which was still holding on to hers, and got off the bed. By the way, Eugene let out a cough as he turned to look at his surroundings. Where exactly is this? This doesn't look like my room. We are in Ura's, Anise answered him. Ura's? That Ura's? Eugene asked in disbelief. To be more precise, we are currently located in the Holy See, which is situated in Eurasia, the capital city of Ura's, Anise further elaborated. Eugene blinked in surprise. What am I doing here? It isn't just you, Hamel. The entire command structure of your divine army, including all of the holy knights you ordained, is currently residing in the Holy See. What? Eugene yelped in shock. Anise informed him, the rest of your divine army is stationed in the border region between Uraz and Helmuth. Unable to think of anything to say, Eugene could only flap his lips soundlessly. He took a few moments to gather his thoughts. Why? Eugene eventually asked, unable to sort out and comprehend all of the information that he had just been given. In response, Anise just clicked her tongue and furrowed her brow impatiently. You were unconscious for 3 whole months, Hamel. Eugene weakly protested. To be more precise, it's 93. Anise spoke over him. In those 3 months, Helmuth, no pandemonium, has gone into a full state of war. This was no time to be lying down. Eugene quickly leaped up out of bed. Chapter 570. The Holy See 2. According to Vermouth's predictions, the deadline he had given Eugene would arrive within a year. Eugene naturally had no intention of leaving things right until the end of that year. There was no definite time set for the deadline, as Vermouth's prediction was solely based on how long he felt he would be able to endure. But to put it simply, the Demon King of Destruction was expected to escape Vermouth's suppression and wake up on its own within the year. What would happen then? Would the Nur proliferate on a large scale like they had during the Age of Myth? Or would the Demon King of Destruction manifest directly and wipe away the world, just like he had during the last days of the previous era? Eugene hoped that it would be the former. If the Demon King of Destruction manifested directly, there would be far too little time left for them to do anything to avert it. In the case of the former outcome, it might not be much, but it would at least buy them a little more time. However, before all that, they still needed to climb up Babel in order to defeat the Demon King of Incarceration. If they wanted to reach their final goal of saving Vermouth and slaying the Demon King of Destruction, they first had to overcome the challenge of the Demon King of Incarceration. Yet even with all that in mind, it was still impossible for them to simply rush to attack the Demon King of Incarceration. But the problem with waiting to make a plan was that Eugene had been in a coma for the past 3 months. A declaration of war. Eugene groaned as he held his throbbing head. He had already heard the news from Anise. A month ago, the Demon King of Incarceration had announced the start of the war. If this were in the past, it would have been Gavid Lindman who had made the announcement in his role as the Archduke of Helmuth instead of the Demon King of Incarceration himself, but Gavid Lindman had already died at Eugene's hand. That said, the Demon King of Incarceration still hadn't appeared in person to make this announcement. Instead, the one who stepped forward to do so was the former Tower Master of the Black Tower of Magic, Balzac Ludbeth. Amelia Merwin had already fallen into a state beyond any possibility of recovery, so of the 3 mages of incarceration, Balzac was the only one left who was currently still alive and well. So when Balzac Ludbeth reappeared, it made sense that it would be as the emissary of the Demon King of Incarceration. A month ago, all of the screens installed within Helmuth suddenly turned on by themselves and began broadcasting Balzac's figure. Balzac had informed the city's residents that the oath from 300 years ago had finally expired. Soon, Elite warriors from every nation on the continent would be invading Helmuth. As such, all of the demon folk who wished to partake in this war would need to gather at Babel. Helmuth had no intention of avoiding this war. Having betrayed the Demon King's mercy, the ungrateful humans would soon be making their way to Pandemonium to challenge the climb up through Babel. There they would meet their deaths in Babel. That was a basic summary of what Balzac had announced in his role as the emissary of the Demon King of Incarceration. The very first thing that was arranged after this declaration had been given was the mass evacuation of all non-demon folk immigrants who had been living in Pandemonium. Even though I thought that they would keep the humans as hostages, Eugene thought to himself in surprise. Though on second thought, it didn't seem all that unexpected, as the Demon King of Incarceration wasn't the type to use Helmuth's immigrants as hostages. Shortly after this extreme evacuation policy had been implemented, Pandemonium, as befitting of its name, had descended into a frenzy of warlust. This was all thanks to the fact that the city was now solely occupied by savage demon folk with cravings for war. Then a week before today, Pandemonium had begun to move towards the front lines of Helmuth. After Helmuth declared a state of war, all nations across the continent immediately began entering their own war preparations, Anise reported. Each country began mustering its elite forces and mercenaries, then deployed them onto their border with Eurus, as this is the closest nation to Pandemonium. All of your holy knights also began gathering here, quickly arriving at the Holy See. Just hold on for a second. Eugene suddenly raised his hands to stop Anise from continuing to speak. He had been trying to listen patiently until the end of Anise's explanation, but he couldn't help but interrupt her. There's something that I don't quite understand. Did you say that Pandemonium has moved towards the front lines of Helmuth? And that's why the other nations have deployed their troops on Ura's borders. That's right, Anise said as she nodded in confirmation. No. Just what on earth does that even mean? How on earth does a city like Pandemonium even move? Eugene asked in confusion. He just couldn't understand what Anise meant by those words. The city of Pandemonium stood at the very heart of Helmuth. In the first place, 300 years ago, the Empire of Helmuth had been founded with Babel at its center and had then proceeded to spread outwards across the red plains that surrounded the castle. The current Pandemonium might be seen as such a highly developed city that no other capital city of any other nation could even compare to it. But 300 years ago, all there was where the city now stood were the blood-red plains that the desperate armies of mankind had been forced to march across while risking death with every step they took. I meant it in a literal way, Anise stated with a serious look on her face. Anise knew that Eugene's confusion at this news was something that couldn't be helped. Even Anise herself, who was currently giving him this report, had had no choice but to react in a similar fashion a week ago after personally witnessing the sight of Pandemonium in motion. Rather than trying to explain it through words, it would be quicker for you to see it for yourself, Anise said with a sigh as she walked over to the window. When Eugene, who had been unconscious for nearly 100 days, had first woken up, any overly bright sources of light would have been enough to damage his eyes. That was why Eugene's room had been dimly lit with only faint sources of light for illumination. However, it wasn't like the room he was in was devoid of windows. Anise pulled back the thick curtains and, seeming to decide that alone wasn't enough, she also pulled aside the screens that usually covered the windows. "Arg, the light is burning my eyes," Eugene complained. "If you lose your sight, then allow me to serve as your eyes," Anise offered generously. "No, you can just heal them, remember," Eugene reminded her bluntly. "To think that that would be your reaction to such romantic whispers," Anise grumbled as she threw open the glass windows themselves. The bright sunlight instantly illuminated the entire room. Eugene's eyes were stinging and sore from the light, but after blinking a few times he soon got used to it. Looking at the angle of the sun, he realized that it was already noon. Just as this thought went through his head, Eugene spotted something in the distance. "What is that?" Eugene's voice couldn't help but tremble slightly. He walked over to the window on unsteady legs. Then he held onto the window frame with his hands as he stuck his head further out the window for a better look. "Do you understand what I meant now?" Anise asked sympathetically. The target of Eugene's observation was at a considerable distance. They were in the Holy See, the center of the capital city of Eurus, so they were located quite far from the country's border with Helmuth. However, even from this distance that thing could still be seen as a faint dot in the sky. But how could Eugene ever mistake its appearance even from this distance? 300 years ago he had repeatedly glared up at that very castle. Eugene was carried back to the Battle of the Red Plains. He recalled the moment when they had raced across that battlefield to reach Babel. All the while they had been clashing with the black fog that was commanded by Gavid. At that moment, as the ground was stained with the combined blood of the demon folk and the death-sworn human army, the Red Plains had truly resembled their name. When the battle was over, everyone had been left glaring up at the castle that loomed in front of them. Babel, Eugene muttered its name darkly. Babel was currently floating high in the sky. Its appearance was completely different from what it had been in Pandemonium. It was no longer shaped like a 99 stories high-rise. Instead, its current appearance was what it had originally looked like 300 years ago. A dark and gloomy-looking castle that seemed to be a literal representation of its role as the Demon King's castle. Just like how, back in the Demon Dragon Ryzakia's fief, the Dragon Demon Castle had once floated aloft in the sky, Babel was flying high in the distant sky. A week ago, the Demon King of Incarceration moved the entire city of Pandemonium to its current location, Anise said as she let out a deep sigh. It was a sight that was hard to believe even when seeing it with the naked eye. Pandemonium literally flew through the sky until it arrived at its current location. Where exactly is the city located now? Eugene asked. It landed right in front of the Alcarti parish, Anise replied. The parish was where the borders of Uraz and Helmuth met. Anise further elaborated. The only building that is currently left floating in the sky is Babel itself. The rest of Pandemonium was landed on the ground a week ago. Having been to Alcarti a few times before, Eugene was able to clearly visualize the place where Pandemonium now stood. Located at the very northern end of Uraz, there was a city named Naren. After passing through the border gate located outside the city and traveling across the wide open plain for several days, one would arrive at Alcarti, the entrance into the land of Helmuth. The place where Pandemonium had currently landed was within those plains on the border between Helmuth and Uraz. Crazy bastard, Eugene muttered with a derisive snort. Was the Demon King trying to save Eugene the trouble of having to walk across the whole of Helmuth to reach him? Or perhaps, did the Demon King intend to end the war personally by arriving at the front lines of Helmuth like this? Either way, this definitely sounded like something that the Demon King of Incarceration would do. In any case, if Eugene were to be defeated by the Demon King of Incarceration when they met in Babel, the Demon King would immediately launch an invasion of the continent, just like he had done 300 years ago. That might have been another reason why the city of Pandemonium itself had been moved to the front lines. They may have made their declaration, but not all demon folk have rallied to Pandemonium, Anise admitted with another long sigh. The younger demon folk are completely uninterested in the idea of war. And even amongst the older demon folk, there seem to be quite a few who are satisfied with their current lives and have no interest in going back to war. But as time passes, the demon folk's numbers will only increase, don't you think? Eugene growled out as he kept glaring at Babel in the distance. Since war hadn't fully broken out just yet, it didn't seem like the demon folk felt any pressing need to head directly to the battlefield. However, the bloodlust of the demon folk was a core part of their very nature. As time passed, the number of demon folk gathering in Pandemonium would surely increase. Anise responded, even if that is truly the case, we still have the edge when it comes to numbers. After all, the birth rate of pure-blooded demon folk is pretty low. Helmuth might be the largest and most powerful empire on the continent, but compared to its vast territory, the proportion of the population who were pure-blooded demon folk wasn't all that high. This was because most demon folk had a lifespan that was too long and a very vague attachment to the concept of a relationship between parents and children. By this point, the number of human immigrants residing in Helmuth had far surpassed the number of demon folk. Of course, no matter how small the number of pure-blooded demon folk was, when one took into consideration the difference in strength between the demon folk and humans, Helmuth's military power wasn't at a level that could be easily ignored. Even if the elite forces from every country on the continent were to gather here, they still wouldn't possess all that large of an advantage in a contest of strength with Helmuth. In fact, the biggest problem was still the Demon King of Incarceration. No matter how many allied troops there were or how small Helmuth's military forces were, all of that was meaningless compared to the power of the Demon King of Incarceration. Simply put, the outcome of this war fully depended on when the Demon King of Incarceration would be defeated. The longer this war went on, the more demon folk would be drawn to pandemonium from all across Helmuth. Even the demon folk who held no desire to involve themselves in the war would be drawn to the battlefield by the scent of blood and forced to succumb to their instincts. So it's lucky that he brought the front line right to us, Eugene muttered as he closed the windows. If pandemonium and Babel had stayed right where they were, it would have been a pain in the ass just getting there. After all, it would have been impossible to use the warp gates between countries while everyone was on a war footing. By the way, Eugene said as he frowned while turning towards Anise, did you just say that bastard Balzac appeared in front of everyone as the demon king of incarceration's emissary? That's right, Anise confirmed. Eugene's frown deepened. Why would he do that? How would I know? Anise said with a shrug. I presume that he just took up the vacant position of the staff of incarceration. But at this point in time? Eugene questioned in disbelief. Wasn't it you, Hamel, who said that we shouldn't consider such a suspicious black wizard to be our ally? Anise pointed out. That might be true, but I never suspected that he would actually attach himself to the demon king of incarceration, Eugene sighed. In all the battles that Balzac had involved himself in thus far, he had served as Eugene's ally on every occasion. Although he had never seemed all that trustworthy, Balzac had never once actually attempted to betray them. This had even led Eugene to ponder a certain possibility. What if Balzac was actually planning to betray the demon king of incarceration? However, in the end things still turned out like this. Well, he's not really in a position where he could betray the demon king, even if he wanted to, Eugene muttered to himself. In Samar and Nahama, Balzac had made himself the enemy of the previous staffs of incarceration. But for some reason the demon king of incarceration himself hadn't seen fit to lay down any punishment on Balzac for doing so. Despite all that, in the end Balzac was still a black wizard who was bound by a contract to the demon king of incarceration. If his contracted partner had been just another low-level demon folk, then it might have been possible for the black wizard to use his wits to usurp control of the contract. But such tactics would never work against a demon king. As such, this meant that Balzac would never be able to betray the demon king of incarceration. That said, to think that he would actually end up acting as the emissary of the demon king of incarceration, Eugene shook his head. Both Gavid and Noir had already perished. The other two members of incarceration's 3 mages had also fallen. As a result, Balzac naturally became the sole subordinate of any significance to the demon king of incarceration. Was that his goal all along? Eugene thought suspiciously. Considering that Balzac had helped to defeat the other 2 black wizards contracted to the demon king, such a possibility wasn't entirely unlikely, but, from what Eugene had seen of Balzac, the wizard didn't seem to possess any ambitions for things such as power. That said, Balzac also didn't seem to desire the outbreak of a war like the other high-ranking black wizards and demon folk of Helmuth had. Balzac's true pursuit was the fulfillment of his lifelong dream. He wanted to become a legendary wizard, someone whose name would go down in history. There's no way he could be planning on becoming a legendary wizard by killing either me or Sienna, right? Eugene questioned doubtfully. If that was the case, then Balzac was truly a fool. Eugene sincerely believed this proposition. No matter what techniques Balzac might use, it was impossible for him to inflict any serious harm on either Eugene or Sienna. Then just what kind of scheme could he really be up to? Eugene didn't have any clue as to what kind of plan Balzac might be brewing up, but if they did encounter Balzac as they climbed up Babel, and if Balzac truly did choose to stand in their way as an enemy, then Eugene would destroy him without any hesitation. Sienna would also do the same. Whether they met Balzac in Babel or on another battlefield, if he truly did turn out to be their enemy, they would definitely take his life and thus crush his dream of wanting to become a legendary wizard into nothingness. But where is Sienna? Eugene suddenly asked. Anise glanced at a clock. At this time she should be instructing the Divine Army's magic corps. Eugene hesitated. There's something that I've been meaning to ask you for a while now, but I got distracted. And I really am just asking because I truly don't know the answer. But why exactly are we calling it my Divine Army? It's only natural, Hamel, Anise said with a smile. After all, you're the one who will be leading this army as its commander-in-chief. Eugene's eyes fluttered in shock as he was met with this calm response. Anise shook her head slowly as she said, Hamel, haven't you realized yet? You are the God Emperor of the Holy Empire of Uras, the speaker for the Allied powers, and the commander-in-chief of the Divine Army. And who went and decided all that? Eugene protested. It was agreed upon by the leaders of all the allied powers. And who asked you to go and put yourself in an unresponsive state for 3 whole months? Anise scoffed. It's not like I was unconscious because I wanted to be. Eugene erupted before asking with a frown. Also, what was that about a god emperor? Yours is a theocracy that worships the light, and the Pope is, at its core, the leader of the church. Meanwhile you, Hamel, are the one who was chosen by the light and entrusted with its divinity. So isn't it only right for him to concede the rulership of Eurus to you? Anise asked as if she was only stating the obvious. Eugene was left speechless. Anise continued, since you've already taken up the godhood of the light, what's so difficult about becoming Eurus god emperor as well? I already told you that I didn't want to become some sort of king. Eugene protested weakly. Don't worry about that. You'll only be an emperor in name. The Pope will continue to handle all of the government affairs as he had done up to this point. And even though you are the speaker for the Allied forces and the commander-in-chief of the Divine Army, no one actually expects you to manage either the Alliance or the Divine Army, Anise revealed with a snort. Although Eugene himself had said that he didn't want to do it, after hearing her say something like that, he couldn't help but feel a little offended. Why not? Eugene demanded in a hurt tone. I might have some unrevealed talent for kingship that even I don't know about. No way, Hamel, are you seriously saying that? I can also admit that you do possess some charisma to a certain extent, but to tell the truth, you really don't have the talent to be a king. Anise shook her head sadly. Eugene silently scowled. To think that you, someone who always goes running off on your own at the drop of a hat without any heed for your protection, and who also charges headfirst into battle, would actually believe that you could be a king. Anise gasped in shock. It's terrifying just trying to imagine it. Hamel, if you were to become a king, all of the knights and your other subjects would soon become mentally ill from the stress of your leadership. Eugene still couldn't find a way to deny those words, but after hearing Anise voice such skepticism, each word felt like it was impaling him in the heart. A king just needs to be brave enough, Eugene muttered petulantly. Anise sighed. Now you're even saying something that only Molin would say. Don't you think you're being a bit too harsh? Eugene protested once more. Then allow me to correct myself, Anise sniffed coldly. What you said just now was very rude to Molin. After all, Molin at least managed to found his own country and run it smoothly. Eugene couldn't see any way to refute her, so he could only clutch his chest in pain. With a faint hope, he turned to look at Mare and Rhaenyra for help. However, the two of them couldn't think of any way to defend Eugene either, so they kept their lips shut and avoided his gaze. Although Eugene had naturally expected a turncoat like Mare to react like this, to think that Rhaenyra, who had always taken his side no matter the issue, would also choose to avoid his gaze. Eugene's clenched fists trembled in grief and anger. Hey! A voice suddenly shouted as the window that had only recently been closed burst open. The person who popped her head into the room through the now open window was Sienna, who was currently supposed to be instructing the magic corps. Sienna looked at Eugene with tear-filled eyes and stammered, Why, you've finally woken up. But before she could fully share her tear-filled joy at his revival, Eugene preempted her by asking, Hey, between Molin and me, who do you think would be a better king? What? A stunned Sienna replied. Eugene repeated himself, Between Molin and me, who would be a better? Sienna angrily cut him off. You having finally woken up after 3 whole months, do you really think those are the words you should be saying to me right now? She didn't know what conversation they had been having that caused him to ask her that question, but one thing was for certain. This wasn't the time and place for Eugene to say such a thing. Eugene panicked as he watched the rage flooding Sienna's tear-filled eyes. After hesitating for a few more seconds, he greeted her with an awkward smile. Hello? Bam. Sienna's fist slammed into Eugene's cheek.